Welcome to Tales from the Golden Imp. I am Joe Craig, the Impish Skald. In this palate cleanser, we will be telling the story of dreams of life. As one man reflects on the meaning of his dreams as he challenges a repeating dream to see if he can push it beyond the presumed limits of the arcane arts. Welcome to Tales from the Golden Imp. Palate Cleanser, Dreams of Life. Dreams. Dreams always have meaning. But what meaning does a dream have when you have it every night? That is a question that one must live with. Everything that I have studied have brought me to this point. Everything that I dream. Everything that a dream says is impossible. My theories point to being possible. In Yidrix I trust. Through magic, all is possible. Reflecting upon the journey thus far, my ambition has always been driven by my dreams. My dreams began with the desire to become a powerful mage. And this dream began when I first saw magic firsthand. It was not powerful magic, but it was magic nonetheless. With a complex gesture, a child falling from a house was caught by an invisible hand and dropped to safety. Seeing that gesture and the weaves of energy could produce something that could save lives set my feet upon a path that became a life's journey. I was but a child of 6 when I witnessed powerful magic, in a basic sense of the word. At 8, I witnessed the terrible power of magic and learned the responsibility of the craft, and learned how important it was. I saw a powerful mage use power without discretion. The calamity was horrible. 10 died that day. At the age of 10, I was brought to Sanctarium Moors, at great expense of my family, and at great personal cost as well. It was that very day that I had to say goodbye to my mother and father, for the last time, unbeknownst to me. It is here that our story begins. Sanctarium Moors was just outside the city of Selidrine, and my home of Devalton. However, this was nearly half a kingdom away from where my parents called home. We traveled by boat from Reef Town and the Malimbone coast, 10 days by ship with wind in our sails and the current with us before we arrived at the city of Selidrine. I was picked up at the docks by a wizard that would be my sponsor for the upcoming trials. Seeing the great tower for the first time was breathtaking. It was by far the tallest structure that I had seen in my short lifetime. The dark stone of the tower stabbed the brilliant blue skies. There wasn't a cloud in the sky that day. The stone was polished, so the sun did reflect off the dark stones. Still, to this day, I could not tell you what the stone was. The stained glass windows were all alight, for the most part. But from the docks, you couldn't tell what the glass was depicting. It wasn't until I reached the base of the tower that I was able to see some of the imagery depicted in the stained glass. The first image was an initiate donning a white robe and beginning their studies that would lead them to become what is called a wizard. The power of this image was unprecedented and still burns in my mind all these years later. It was here that I was tried and tested for the first time. Here was also the place where the dream that plagues me first showed itself. It was the night that I was inducted to the Grand School of Sanctarium Moors, given my own white robe, and with that a single band of black. The edging of the robe signified the school, whereas the robe itself signified the rank I had accomplished. At that moment, wizard would be what I was called, and still, to this day, wizard is what I am. That night I laid my head upon the pillow of the dormitory that it would be my home until it wasn't. It was that very bed that the dream first came. In this place of Yidrix, I was shown the power that I could manifest. I heard the voice of a man that to this day I believe truly was the voice of Yidrix. Contemplation of the laws of life and death are paramount. It is through these laws that all countenance is governed. Many of these laws can be pushed, bent, even broken, but none of them without cost. Life is a determinate factor in what we can accomplish. In that, the elves and dragons have always the greatest play. But in the shortness of the length of life that others face, come the boldness to push those limits. A quest that one must attest to is always to find which laws are absolute and which laws are mere limits of understanding. What can one accomplish if death is your limit? That is the question that the questing mind of a 10-year-old took away from that statement. Just as much as the Hall of Sanctarium Moors is a temple of Yidrix, it is one to Necropos. Yet many would debate this fact. Many of my brethren violate many of the laws which Necropos holds true. Those that would call themselves necromancers, at heart, spit upon the laws in which the dead must remain so. The art of necromancy itself is a study of this violation. But even with that, the laws are in place and must be challenged. Many of these laws we challenge, and the greatest among us push on the laws that would be the base fabric of the difference between life and death. Life given to the flesh is one thing, but is a hollow thing without a soul. And so far that has been the gateway that only the divine have been able to open. Though my brethren are willing, it seems that law cannot be broken without divine aid. The dream, however, was more than mere words. I saw a form that I grew into poring over a manuscript. A tempest surrounding me. The madness that was gripping my eyes terrified me as a child. I had to see. I had to know, which was just beyond the ink of the pages. I had to understand what was written in a way to push myself beyond the limits of the parchment, the ink, and the quill. The theory held there was one that would push against the fabric of reality itself. Locked in that tempest, locked in that room, I faced and contemplated if I was dealing with a law that was absolute. Though the words on the page was clearly stated, it was impossible. The determination in which I was questing this law made me question if the law was simply a safeguard put in place to protect the flesh of the living from the veil of what was beyond. The tempest was one thing that was in play due to the challenge I was issuing to the gods themselves. I would know if this law was absolute, or if it was one that could be pushed, bent, broken. At first, this dream was a one-off incident. As I grew in life and grew in power, it became more frequent. Eventually, it became a constant. I knew that my sleep was not complete until the dream passed my nightly gaze. It became part of my mantra for understanding which laws were merely suggestion and which ones were fact. It guided me to push the limits of my own body. It pushed me to question my instructor in ways that garnered me a reputation of being a difficult student. The more I was able to push the arcane arts, the more laws I questioned. The laws of constant energy I found were malleable at best. It couldn't be broken, but it could be bent in ways that made one question if breaking it were merely possible. I never managed to break it nonetheless. You could not create energy nor destroy it, but you could amplify and nullify it until it was harmless. This is what caused the backlash of those that didn't understand the law well. It was through the formula, the process, the focus that one could learn to manipulate the energy of the world and shape it to thy own will. It was one of the founding principles of being a wizard, and what separated a wizard from everyone else in the world. Well, save the beasts that exist as anomalies of this law, as the law itself has warped their very existence. It was through the study of these animals that I first learned the theory that pushed my studies to the rank of master journeyman. Dragons, for instance, are beasts, yes, but they are far more than that. They exist, with this law being a variable instead of a constant. They are so close to the primal forces of the worms and hold within them the spark of creation. Even the lowliest wormling have a divine essence to them that can fuel oh so much. It was indeed from one of these beasts that I learned that wizards, in their own right, could be forces of nature. We bend this law to do our magic, and that makes us like them. My studies of these magical beasts led my feet to wander and my mind to inquire. It was during this time that the world around me was gathered up in the whole worship of one such force of nature, a charismatic black dragonkin that was above average wizard and above an average warrior. This magnetic force warped all of us up with his words. He led us to believe that the Volton was far more powerful than anyone let us believe. Our home was always one of the lowest population kingdoms of Calidria. Through that, it always held us back from being a greater nation. However, Callisto changed that. Being Dragonkin, he was one step removed from the great dragons that I had studied. The law of constant energy was a suggestion to him. His understanding of magic plus his own divine nature led him to be able to manipulate it in ways that I will never fully understand. They are not my pursuit, you see. I would be remiss to say that I did not get caught up in the rhetoric. To be in the presence of the Crown Prince of the Volton was one step away from an energy source that carried with it a wake. You could not be in such a presence and not be inclined to move one way or another. Not to say I was ever in his graces, or even considered myself a colleague. No, that was not my place. And besides, I was too wrapped up in my own experiments. I was no necromancer, so I did not get gathered up when Haro selected the greatest minds that he could on that front. What they did not know is what I was trying to understand. As the world began to learn the name of Callisto, I was a master journeyman, traveling the world. I was not fated to be a member of that military force that exercised its will to the rest of the world, though it was an excellent case study for me in challenging the laws that I had set my mind to challenge. Life was short for a human, and from an early age I sought to push against that law, to find a way to breach the limits of human existence. It was indeed an avenue of necromancy, but not through the reanimation of flesh, but the focus of the energies held within our own being. Could the energy that we continue to use and expel be confined, drawn back in, or in other ways regrown? This became my quest. Once understanding this and knowing that limit, it would give me ample time for more pursuits, but death must be defeated in some way first. There were legends that gave me hope that this law could be bent or even broken. Humans throughout legend and lore of Calidria that lived long lives. Wizards like Xephos, which lived ages, gave me hope that the law was merely guidance. Wizards like Vexnil that used necromancy to keep his soul bound to the flesh gave me guidance and avenues of pursuit. I was determined to be one of the wizards that defied this law and would redefine what it meant to be a wizard. It was my greatest pursuit and one that prevented me from attaining the rank of master for many a year. The Council of Magic that held the mantle from me, stating that I was wasting my talents on such a pursuit. They stated that the body of a human is one that is limited by life that we are given, and that was a law that could not be challenged without the sacrifice of living flesh. After all, that's how Vexnil had done it. I would not be bound by this. I had to push beyond this limit. I had to understand the true limit of this law. Yidric's words continued to ring in my mind for my dreams. The laws around life and death must be challenged and understood. It was a quest that I felt that was given to me by Yidrix himself. It was a solitary quest, to say the least. Yes, every one of the short-lived races sought ways to elongate their own life, more and more as they aged. It wasn't necessarily immortality that I sought. It was more akin to understanding how the fabric of my own being was limited by the fact that I was a human. Why were nearly all other races given more time to explore the world of Calidria than humans? I saw this as an injustice that needed a counterbalance for the scales. I was determined to be that counterbalance. On a cellular basis, we were so similar to other races, but yet the gods determined that some would be immortal and others were to be gifted with death, a phrase that I always found preposterous. It was through my study of trolls that I finally gained the mantle of Master Wizard. Trolls are interesting creatures. Their cells naturally regenerate, but yet they still age. They are another species that is long-lived, lest you damage them with fire or acid. Applying this energy to the flux, that is the helix of a troll, disrupts the natural flow of energy that rebuilds them from the inside out. It was through these trolls, however, that I discovered what led me to believe that there were a way to breach the barrier of immortality that was said to be impossible for a human to achieve. The way the blood would heal the body was something that blew my mind upon studying it. I started to apply the process to human blood and found that there was a way to replicate it. It was about the feedback that the energy field was using. That was something that I could do. Unlike the divine arts, healing was something that we could not do so well. But this was something else, something more. Instead of the energy shifting to the ether, there was a way to keep the energy within the body itself. Through this process, could aging be stopped? In stopping aging, would immortality be achieved? My brethren that practiced necromancy found that the flesh decaying is nearly impossible to stop. Once life left the body, they were unable to prevent the flesh from decaying. It made the hired help a smelly situation, unfortunately. It was one of the reasons I never took up the art, though I have had to study some of it for the pursuit of understanding my main goal. If we humans were able to achieve such wonderful accomplishments in but a lifetime, how would 10 lifetimes treat us? How much could we accomplish in that time? I had set out to learn just that thing. The greatest among us fought against this paradox to no avail. What made my research any different? Well, that would be fully dependent on the outcome. I was not paving new roads, but treading on roads already paved by others. It was the observation that I discovered along the way that would lead me to the final miles to my destination. This road was well trod, but all of those roads diverged where my research truly began. All of it began with the study of trolls, to be honest. To keep the energy that slowly left the body in it seemed so simple of a solution, but the problem lied in just how and why that energy left the body. It came out with our offspring. It came off through our life choices, even with the food or drink that we partook in. It seemed to leave us when we bonded physically with another being, but in that there was exchange that aged us, but seemed to keep us young at the same time. With the seeping of this energy almost coming off of us, like kinetic energy with friction, how then would you stop that bleeding? Well, the body itself had defenses for literally stopping bleeding, but not for this. What about other races? Spreading my research with a focus, I looked to elves. They aged, but ever so slowly, and it's believed that they would never die of old age. Even then they had seepage that I saw in humans. Creatures with shorter lifespans seem to have this seepage in greater amounts, so even slowing this would lengthen the life of a person if my theories were correct. This is when the dreams became this warning, this suggestion that I was making a grave mistake. The dream said one thing, but my research pointed to it being a fallacy. I would challenge this dream no matter the cost. I had to see. I had to know. The next phase of my study led me to a great deal of time with a divine healer, and the flow of energy was truly amazing there. With the troll, the energy flowed from and back into his being to heal itself. With the divine, there was a transference of energy from the healer to the wounded individual. Yet this energy ultimately did not come from the healer themselves, for it was not their energy that they were yielding to the wounded. Speaking with the divine healer, they channeled the energy from their deity, and through that they were able to perform the miraculous things that they were able to do. It is through their God that they are able to heal, bring divine justice to a foe, or even life back to a corpse. The last one was of particular interest to me, as there is a fundamental difference between this and the necromantic arts that I had studied in my past. Speaking with the Divine Master, who was a high priest of Necropus of all beings. They explained to me that the art of bringing someone back to life was a complex process that doesn't always work. First, the vessel itself had to be healed in a way that could once again sustain life. Second, a connection between the body and the soul must be established. But this is not a straightforward connection, as the soul could not be moved between realms. And finally, the soul must find a way to the tether to follow it back to the body. According to these divine laws, life itself comes from the soul, and without a soul you do not have life. In accordance with this law, the life that a necromancer provides to a corpse is not really a life at all, which is why the body still decays. Without this soul, the energy still falls into entropy, leaking off energy that should be used to sustain life. But therein lies the fable of a lich. Intelligent undead have a soul, but still the body holds on to this entropy. A lich is formed by binding the soul to the dead body to provide itself life once again. Something in the divine laws are being broken to form such powerful undead beings. Many times it is the way that immortality is achieved by powerful wizards with the study of necromantic arts. The body is not alive, though it has a soul bound to it. There is no beating heart, no breathing lungs. Just a corpse with a soul bound to it. Lichdom is considered to be the highest form of necromancy, and still, life escapes it. That was not my goal. My goal was to sustain my life to the point that I could contend with the long lives of an elf. Becoming a lich was a false life. I wanted a true one. Combining what I had learned from necromancy and the divine arts, I set to study the deeper equation of life. There was a through line that I had to find. The soul does not leave the body until death occurs, and the powerful undead have a soul anchored to the body, though the body is not a living one. There was no need for an anchor until death occurred. But could it be used to change the flow of energy? I learned in my studies another aspect of a lich, the phylactery. Should the body become destroyed, it was a second anchor that prevented the soul from passing to the gates of Necropus. This second anchor would be one that I would start with mastering. I saw value in that anchor, and perhaps that second anchor that I would find a way to elongate my life. The trouble was, it was a well-guarded secret amongst necromancers. Each necromancer that I spoke with told me that their studies did not include creation of this soul anchor. The spell to do the anchoring was not the problem, as that was documented. It was the formation of the soul jar itself. Now I say soul jar, as that is typically what is used. Some vessel that is able to hold water and can be sealed is typically what is used. Another interesting point of note that I found was the commonality of some form of crafting art to form such a vessel themselves. Many of the necromancers that were trying to create such an object believed that it had to be crafted by hand. Pottery, glass blowing, and the like were such arts that were practiced by many a necromancer. I have to say that my work with a potter's wheel greatly reduced the anxiety that I faced from the quandary that I had set myself to solve. With the requirements of forming it by hand led me to understand that this object would be an enchanted object, which made sense for the formula, the spell to create the anchor. It took me a few years, but I managed to push my limits of magical understanding to the point that I was able to create my own soul jar of sorts. I also found that this anchor could be transferred between vessels if needed. It was the first step, and the study of my energy after creating such a vessel was where I had my next breakthrough. My soul's energy was woven with the energy of the vessel, and entropy around it lessened. My own entropic energy lessened. The creation of the soul jar was one that slowed the aging, as it slowed the natural entropy that the body faced. This led me to question of how can I create the cycle that contains the entropic force and stops the cycle altogether. Now that I had more time to work on it, I found that I was not nearly as stressed about manifesting my goal. The next trip was to study with a deeply deplorable necromancer that knew no bounds in the range of study in which they pursued. Not just a necromancer, but one that built constructs. My next trip was to study with Vexnil. Gaining an audience with Vexnil took some doing, but I managed to gain just that much of an audience. It was at the Grand Council Chambers in Xephos that I met this decaying being, his body having aged long past life. The council member was a lich by my reckoning. It was on the coast of Xephos that I managed to convince this powerful being that my desires were such that it was worth his time. This did not come without some work on my behest. I would spend my days working in his golem labs, assisting him on the formation of new golems. It helped me learn the art of making a golem. Again, the theory of the soul anchor played the role here. A golem contained within it a spark of life. This spark contained within the being much like the soul jar. It was this realization that earned me the ability to study with Vexnil. Vexnil's teaching methods were different to say the least. Whereas most magi instructors focused on theory, Vexnil focused on the application of magic in a practical sense. Golems that he created in his labs were the guardians of the Grand Citadel. Crafting my first golem gave me the lesson to create something that I had already created, a soul jar. Showing and producing that had earned me lessons to craft one was that much more resilient. The final study with Vexnil was to learn how to create the anchor within the body that would allow me to become a lich like him. This wasn't my desire, but I needed to know how it worked to adapt it to what my ultimate goal was. It was the opinion of Vexnil that the lich was a superior state of existence than flesh, because the need to sustain the body was nullified. I politely disagreed with that theory. But through those studies, I did manage to learn the guarded secret to become a lich. I even managed to cast a spell to create the anchor within my own body. This was a great breakthrough, and one that I would not have considered. The rate at which entropy affected my body was dramatically reduced, giving me more time to create a path of my own. I'd come to the end of the roads that came before me, save one, but I did not know that at the time. The existence of one was proof needed to hold the resolve, but like I said, I did not know that one path existed at this time. Over the next 2 decades, I spent my life in temples, libraries, and archives throughout Calidria. I spent my time in labs trying to push the envelope even farther. I was so close, but yet so far away. The anchors lacked a component that's vitally important to true immortality. And the closer I got to the goal, the farther away it seemed to be. I was up against the wall and was getting frustrated, to say the least. In one of my bouts of frustration, I discovered something that I had not yet learned about these anchors. If the anchors were close to one another, entropy nearly stopped. It didn't altogether stop, but it was greatly reduced. The flow of energy had to be the key. Over those 2 decades, I had only aged slightly. How to stop it altogether was the question. That is when I found a solution. But one I did not like. If my physical form was inside the soul jar itself, entropy stopped. I had to be an anchor for this to work? What kind of life would that be? That is when I began to focus, once again, on the soul jar. Taking what I learned from golems, and the materials that were made of them, I realized that you could create a soul jar out of any material. If I wanted this eternal life, I would have to learn to build something that I could live in for the rest of my long life. I had a solution that would give me more time to find the true answer. It was a solution that I had to work towards until a better one came along. I began to build myself a tower, a place to study and learn. I placed the first stones that became my home in a city that was yet to be. The town of Gerunder, on the coast of the great lake of Gerunder, I found my home. It took me a very long time, but eventually it was built. Many offered to help me build the structure, but I had learned that I had to do it myself. It may not hold water, but it would hold my soul. Gerunder Tower was built, and I had eternal life so long as I remained in the tower. This had a negative side effect though. The further away from the tower, the quicker entropy caught up with me. I had accomplished my goal, but I wasn't done. There had to be a way to not be bound to a structure. Until then, I would rule over the town of Gerunder and see if I could not grow it to a city of note. Through this accomplishment, I was presented with a grey cloak that marked me at the rank of Magus. I was presented this cloak by Vexnil himself. He traveled all the way from Xephos to present me with the cloak to mark my grand accomplishment. Though all was not finished, I had accomplished something truly great. Vexnil and I exchanged notes over the process, as he now treated me nearly as an equal. Granted, he saw lynchdom as a superior state of being, and still I disagree with him. But I have been able to push the laws. Could they still be broken? This accomplishment allowed me time to see what I could accomplish. Was this law absolute or merely a suggestion? I would spend the next few centuries if needed exploring this and continuing to push this envelope. This is an excerpt of the personal journey of the Lord of Gerunder, Magus Maris Kifsgurd. Well, travelers, I hope you enjoyed this palate cleanser. A taste of something a little different to hold you over. Next session, we will be back to our main course as we determine the fate of Meg and see what this siege has done for the city of Durg. I hope this little respite has helped you all get a little breath of fresh air. I want to thank Adrian Von Ziegler for the privilege to use his music to make this story much better. For this month, travelers, I will be making pelmeni, a dumpling dish that we'll be making by hand. You can find the recipes of Calidria up on patreon.com. With that said, I want to thank you for listening. Also, if you wish to support the podcast, a rating where you find it would mean a lot, or a simple thumbs up in the YouTube space, or a subscription if you really like it. If you want to support a bit more and get the recipes of Calidria in your kitchen, as well as additional lore content, please support me over on patreon.com. That's patreon.com/goldenimpin. Signing up will give you access to our Discord server. I hope to build a great community over there, but I can only do that with you. So why don't you join us and join the conversation? And if you want to follow me outside the podcast space, you can find me over on Blue Sky at Empress Scald. I am Joe Craig, the Empress Scald. Thank you for listening, and remember, you've been scalded.